Now, so good morning everyone and welcome to today's webinar, the latest in our post-EU transition series of webinars. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Anne White and I'm Head of International Trade at Thames Chamber of Commerce. I just need to cover a few housekeeping things today. This session is being recorded. The session recording will be made available after the webinar on our website, and what I will do is, as delegates, I will send the link to them and anything other thing and a copy of the presentation. Thank you for people in advance that have submitted questions. We'll endeavour to raise the ones that are relevant to the topic today, and others that may have been asked, we'll get back to you with the responses if we can't cover them today after the event. If you wish to raise a question during the session, please submit either on the question and answer tab at the bottom of the screen or the chat session. So that would be great. Thank you very much. I just wanted to say a little bit about the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. We are the accredited Chamber of Commerce for Berkshire, Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire, Swindon and Heathrow, and we offer a wide variety of support services for members and non-members, of which international trade is one of them. I have a team of 18 staff who specialise in providing help and assistance and tangible services relating to trade and trade facilitation. So that's enough about the Chamber. The webinar today. So once the transition period ends on the 31st of December 2020, a new era begins for the United Kingdom. This means huge changes to customs processes and procedures. Today's session focusing on the customs special procedures follows on from the one we held earlier a couple of months ago on border control and customs procedures. If you haven't seen that webinar, it is available on our website, and that will give you more of a general overview on what is happening post December 31st. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to our speaker today. He is the owner and manager of our customs partner, Customs Associate Limited, Barbara Scott. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Anne. Yes, good morning, everybody. So today we're going to focus on customs special procedures. As you will be aware, if you have seen the earlier webinar, import and export declarations will be required for trade between the UK and the EU next year. And for the first 6 months, those declarations can be deferred. However, if you are going to use a special procedure, you will not be able to defer those declarations. I don't want to get you confused between special procedures and simplified procedures. I will talk about simplified procedures a bit later on this morning, but simplified procedures facilitate the making of import declarations, and they are going to be very important as well, particularly as we don't know yet whether we are going to have a free trade agreement. And if we are going to have a free trade agreement, what that's going to look like. It is unlikely to be anything like the free trade arrangements that we have today. For example, a free trade agreement only covers originating goods. So goods traded between the UK and the EU that are manufactured or made or produced here may be covered by that free trade agreement. So, for example, if you were importing Italian scarves or you were exporting Scottish scarves to the EU, they may qualify under the free trade agreement. But product that's not manufactured or produced in a country is never part of a free trade agreement. So even if there's a free trade agreement with the EU, if you were bringing in silk scarves from Europe that actually were manufactured in China, they are they're not going to be covered by any free trade agreement. And it's because of this that we really need to examine the special procedures that we might want to apply to avoid us having to pay duty and mitigate those duty costs on goods that are traded between the UK and the EU. So even if, as I say, even if there is a free trade agreement, these procedures may still apply to your business. So the procedures, what we have at the moment is we have EU customs legislation that covers all the arrangements for trading in the UK and obviously in other member states. That legislation, the Union Customs Code and its implementing and delegated regulation, covers all the arrangements for customs special procedures. But from the 1st of January, we are going to have our own customs and trade law. And for customs special procedures, that will be the Customs Special Procedures and Outward Processing EU Exit Regulations 2018. Quite a mouthful. This was actually brought in, this legislation, back in 2018 when it was thought that we possibly could have fallen out of the EU at that point. So this piece of legislation allows special procedures so that we have special procedures within the EU, and it covers inward processing relief, it covers outward processing relief, it covers authorised use, thank you Merlin, which is currently known as end use within the EU. It also covers customs warehousing and temporary admission. That legislation is pretty broad. There will be further legislation which is still being passed to give more detail about how these special procedures will work. And there will also be information given on the HMRC website. Unfortunately, we haven't got that at the moment. We haven't got that guidance because the legislation hasn't been made. But we're assured by HMRC and government that effectively the same procedures will apply next year as they do currently. So the legislation is going to be very similar to the Union Customs Code and the regulations that we have today, except of course today's regulations only cover trade outside the EU, whereas the UK regulations will cover trade with the EU as well. So today I'm going to look at the main special procedures that are popular, which is inward processing relief, outward processing relief, and customs warehousing. We can then, if there's time at the end, take some questions, or I can mention some of the other reliefs. So inward processing relief. Inward processing relief suspends duty on goods imported for processing. It enables a company that is importing goods that are going to be processed and re-exported to not pay any duty on those goods. So if you were bringing in a product from the EU, so you might be bringing in, what might you be bringing in? You could be bringing in some steel and making a widget, which you were re-exporting back to the EU or back to any country in the world. Then you could use inward processing relief to avoid paying duty on the goods that are imported and then re-exported. The goods do not have to be re-exported to the same country. They can be imported, processed, and then re-exported anywhere in the world without you having to pay the UK import duty. So what is processing? Processing can be anything, as I say, from taking that piece of steel and making a widget, or it could be anything from a simple process such as bringing in those Italian scarves, checking them, checking that they meet the quality that you require, that they're all there, and that repacking them and then re-exporting them. So as long as there is a process carried out, however simple that process may be, the goods would qualify for inward processing relief. What is different is the period, what we call the period of discharge of imported goods, or the throughput period. Inward processing relief is only there for processing. It's not there for the storage of goods, which I'm going to talk about a bit later. But the period of discharge means the time that you need from importing the goods to re-exporting them. And you will be approved to import the goods, process them and re-export them within a time that you agree with HMRC. And that's known as the throughput period. And I'll come back to explaining a bit more about that in a moment. The throughput period really does depend on the type of authorisation that you have, because there are two types of authorisation. The first one is what we call a simplified authorisation, also known as authorisation by declaration. And this form of IPR does not require any pre-approval by HMRC. It's simply when the goods are imported, you advise HMRC on the customer's declaration that you want to process these goods and re-export them and claim inward processing relief. It requires security. It requires you to actually deposit the duty and the VAT on the goods before you re-export them. So you do actually have to pay the money up front, and then provided you re-export the goods, the money is returned to you. Under this simplified authorisation, you have 6 months to re-export the goods. So in this case, the period of discharge, or the throughput period, is 6 months. And either you re-export the goods and the duty isn't paid, or you put the goods into free circulation, meaning you haven't re-exported the goods within the 6 months, and therefore you have to pay the duty that was due when the goods were imported. So you only have that 6 months to re-export the goods. Once the goods are re-exported, you complete what's called a bill of discharge, which is notification to HMRC that you have re-exported the goods and will enable them to return your security. Quite a simple process to follow, but unfortunately this type of authorisation can only be used 3 times a year. So it's very good for the occasional import of goods that you're going to re-export. It's particularly good if there's a large item that you want to avoid paying the duty on, because the goods are going to be re-exported after you've processed them. And of course, it's only useful if you are going to do that re-export within 6 months. So if you are going to use inward processing relief more than 3 times a year, then, or you would need to import the goods for longer than 6 months, or process the goods for longer than 6 months, I should explain, you will need a full inward processing relief authorisation. You will need to apply to HMRC and get their approval that you can use inward processing relief. This is called a full authorisation, and one positive that is coming out of the changes next year is that you will not be required to provide a guarantee or deposit the duty or provide a bank guarantee for any duty on the goods unless HMRC felt that the duty was at risk. So for most traders, you will not need to guarantee or pay the duty when you're using an IPR full authorisation from next year. So if you are somebody who already has an IPR authorisation, you will be able to withdraw the security next year, and HMRC will be writing to all IPR traders to explain this. So to obtain an authorisation, you make an application online through the government gate or through the government gateway, but you will also have to complete an additional questionnaire. So the questionnaire will want to, it's in the questionnaire that you provide all the details about the IPR, why you need the IPR and what you're going to be doing, what goods you're going to be processed, what goods are going to be imported and what goods are going to be exported. The one thing that you'll be required to do is actually show HMRC how long you will need to be holding the goods in the UK and processing them. So they will want evidence that the goods are going to be processed. They'll want to know what processes are happening and how long those processes are going to take. So obviously, if you're importing something and all you're doing is actually QCing it and repacking, then you're not going to have a very long period of discharge, and HMRC are going to want you to import those goods, do the process and re-export the goods within quite a short time frame. If you don't meet that time frame, then there are opportunities for applying for an extension to the period if you haven't managed to re-export the goods within the period that HMRC have approved. But obviously that's not something that that HMRC will continue to allow you to do. If there's a reason why goods were not re-exported within the period of discharge, HMRC will allow that to be extended, but not on a continual basis. Once you've made the application and the application is complete and HMRC are happy with it, you should receive the approval within 30 days of application. So there's still plenty of time to get an application in to start using IPR from the 1st of January next year. One thing that's always very important with IPR is to make sure that once you have got your authorisation, you do import and export goods under the terms of that authorisation. If it only covers certain goods, if you've only applied for approval for certain goods, then you cannot import additional products under the authorisation, under your IPR authorisation, without getting further approval from HMRC. And that's an area that companies often fall foul of because they don't realise that the goods that they're importing were not covered by their IPR authorisation. An authorisation generally lasts for 3 years. So you obtain the approval and then have to reapply for a new approval after 3 years. So with IPR, if you don't put goods into free circulation, if you don't re-export the goods, you then put them into free circulation and make a declaration that the goods are going to be coming into the UK and used in the UK, and the duty is payable at that point. So if you cannot export the goods within the period of discharge and there is no evidence that you are going to be able to re-export them, then you pay the duty and put the goods into free circulation. And there's no interest payable on the duty. So you have actually had the benefit of not paying the duty in that period. The one additional thing that you do have to do with inward processing relief is make quarterly returns to HMRC. You fill in a form called the BOD1 and send that in each quarter to HMRC to explain what goods you've imported and what goods you've re-exported during that quarter under your IPR authorisation. So, as I say, all the detail about the operation of IPR will be reissued by HMRC soon with additional guidance on how to complete the application form. We are hoping that there is going to be a new application form which includes the additional questionnaire. That hasn't been issued yet, so HMRC are saying to people to use the forms that are still currently on the website if you want to apply for IPR now, even if it's not going to be used until we leave the IPR authorisation is not going to be used until next year. So it's something that you can be getting on with straight away. And before I move on to OPR, were there any specific questions on IPR?
Yes, there are a couple, Barbara. One is Toby's asked, does that mean CCG will no longer be required?
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes, you'll no longer require a CCG. Customs Comprehensive Guarantee is the guarantee that was required for using IPR and other special procedures. That will no longer be required under UK legislation. And
we've got a question from Julia who said, if you were to use IPR on an item that was not originally listed, what action would you have to take retrospectively?
You may be able to retrospectively get it added to your authorisation. I'm just a bit hesitant here because I don't want to say something that's incorrect, because basically if you import something to IPR for which you are not authorised, then the duty is payable. You can get a retrospective IPR authorisation, so that would then enable you to recover the duty on those goods once it was approved. So there may be a time where you use the IPR authorisation, you've used it incorrectly, so the duty is then payable, but you may then be able to get a retrospective approval for those goods.
Okay, and just one more. What is security bond on VAT and duty on ITA? Is it a bank letter or a bond, or?
So it was for the IPR with on the simplified authorisation, it can be a bank bond, yes, or it can be cash. Often, if you're using an import agent, he will require you to actually make the cash payment, and it will be returned to you when you evidence that the goods have been re-exported.
There's a couple more, Barbara, coming in. I don't know if we've got time.
Yeah, let's
quickly. Can you confirm repackaging does not count for IPR? They import 2 products from the EU and repack them in one box and re-export.
Yes, you would be able to use IPR for that. Obviously, what you can't do is import them, put them on the shelf, leave them there for a few weeks, and then repackage and re-export, because the goods would not HMRC would not allow you to have the goods sitting around under inward processing relief. You would have to actually import them, process them and re-export them. But you may be able, if you had a full authorisation, you may be able to get that authorisation for 2 or even 3 months. So that would be of benefit to you.
Okay, and the last one is, I'm not sure I'm reading this right. For IPR, does the process need to take place in the UK? Can you claim IPR on goods that have sent to the UK for a temporary basis and the process then takes place outside of the UK?
No, so you've imported goods and then you're re-exporting them to be processed somewhere else.
That's how it reads, yeah.
No.
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 Okay, thank you.
Okay, I want to move on now to OPR. We won't take me so long to explain what OPR is because it's a much simpler relief, but it is effectively the opposite of OPR, IPR, inward processing relief. This is outward processing relief. And this is where you are sending goods overseas for processing and re-import. So you may be sending them across to France for some work to be done, and then the goods are being returned. And it avoids duty payable when the goods are returned on the full value of the goods. Because when goods are re-imported, you must pay duty, or you must declare the full value of the goods that you're importing. And obviously, if they contain, or if they are predominantly made up of product that was originally exported from the UK, you don't want to be paying the full rate, the full amount of duty on the return of those UK origin goods. An application is made on the form SP4. Again, as I said, these are the current forms that are on the UK website. They are the EU forms, and they will be changing in due course, but they can be used for applying for these reliefs now. OPR works on a basis of you knowing obviously how much the processing overseas costs and and evidencing what will be produced from the goods that you exported. So if you export a vehicle and it comes back as having had a new engine put in it overseas, then obviously it's quite straightforward to distinguish between what you exported and you are re-importing. But often what happens is you might send, for example, a roll of cloth across to Italy to be to make those scarves. If you've sent a whole roll of cloth across to Italy and some scarves are being re-imported, you have to evidence that the scarves are made from the cloth that you sent out. So you have to be able to show that what we call the rate of yield, how many scarves were made from that roll of material, and have some records of how that process was made, so that customs are assured that the goods that you are re-importing were the ones that were originally exported. So you must have evidence of the original export when the goods return. So that would generally obviously be a copy of the export declaration and any invoices showing the goods that were sent out will be needed when the goods are re-imported to be declared to customs at that point. Now, the whole issue about outward processing relief is that often companies that send goods abroad and get them processed and returned are that they only declare the invoice that the overseas processor provides to them, thinking that they only have to pay duty on the cost of that process abroad. That is only the case if you are authorised for outward processing relief. If you're not authorised for outward processing relief, then when the goods return, you must pay duty on the full value of the goods. So it's really important that people who are getting goods processed abroad understand that this procedure must be used, and that when the goods are re-imported, the full value of the goods is still declared, but you deduct from that the cost of the goods that you exported, so that effectively you only pay duty on the overseas processing costs. So it's quite a simple form of relief, but it does require authorisation from HMRC and proper record keeping to evidence that the goods that are being imported are the result of goods that were exported.
I've got a question.
Do we have any questions, Anne?
Yes, I do, Barbara. Thank you. If the goods are imported from the EU and have to be returned to the EU for repair and then returned to the UK, what process would be used?
Okay, well, so come in from the EU and
imported from the EU, returned for repair and then returned to the UK.
Right, so you will have imported them from in the EU, they will have been paid UK duty and come into the UK. If you're then sending them to the EU for repair, you would want to send them, use outward processing relief, so that when they came back, you only paid duty on the original processing costs. However, there is an alternative form of relief, which I did hope to have time to mention at the end, which is returned goods relief, which is not a special procedure. It's a regular procedure. If goods are returned to you, having gone overseas, then provided you can prove that you were the export, no, not necessarily that you were the exporter, but the goods had been exported from the UK, and provided they haven't been enhanced overseas, so the goods are not effectively worth more than they originally were when you exported them, then you can claim returned goods relief. So in that situation, depending on what the repair was, rather than going through the whole outward processing relief authorisation, you may just, when those goods come back from the EU, be able to claim returned goods relief. In all these situations, you have to examine what's actually happening and what processing is occurring to know what relief is available.
I've got just a couple of quick questions on that, Barbara. Is there a maximum number of times that they can use repair relief, return relief? No,
outward processing relief requires an authorisation from HMRC, and yes, you can use it as often as you wish, the same as IPR once you've got a full authorisation.
And one last one on this, if goods were sent to the EU for repair, do you have to pay duty on the repair costs?
Yes, you do. So the goods, when the goods were returned, you would have to pay duty on the full value of those goods, unless you could either claim return goods relief or you were claiming outward processing relief. So it's very important, if you are sending goods out for repair, or if you're a repairer yourself, so you are importing goods for repair, in which case it would be inward processing relief, that you look at these reliefs, because they are going to be quite important to you to make sure you're not paying duty twice.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to move on now to customs warehousing, because this is one of the major special procedures, and one in which a lot of people are interested, because the UK is often used as a base for holding and storing goods for Europe, and this is where customs warehousing comes in. So there are two types of customs warehouse, either a private warehouse or a public warehouse, and a private warehouse being where a company has its own customs warehouse on its premises, and a public warehouse being one usually owned by a logistics company, where it will hold, it will store, warehouse goods on behalf of a number of businesses. The difference between them is the responsibilities of the warehouse keeper. So there are responsibilities for the holder of the authorisation, the company that has the customs authorisation, but there are also responsibilities for the holder of the procedure, the person who deposits goods in the customs warehouse. So a company may be approved as for having a customs warehouse, but there will then be approvals each time goods are placed in the warehouse. There is a procedure of putting the goods into the customs warehouse by what we call the depositor. And in some cases, particularly, well, in the case of a private warehouse, the holder of the authorisation and the holder of the procedure would be the same person. A company would have an IPR, a customs warehouse authorisation, and would also put their own goods in it. Whereas with a public warehouse, the depositor, the person putting goods in the customs warehouse, will not be the same person as the holder of the authorisation, the person who has the customs warehouse. So within a customs warehouse, you cannot process goods. That's why we have inward processing relief. What you can do are what's known as usual forms of handling. And there's a large list of what usual forms of handling means, but it certainly, you know, means storage and repacking goods and that type of thing. It does include some little processes. And, you know, it would, for example, you couldn't make those scarves in the customs warehouse, but you might be able to bring in the big roll of material and just cut it into smaller pieces within the customs warehouse. So you can't actually process goods there. And the other thing with the customs warehouse is that there isn't a period of discharge. You can hold goods in a customs warehouse for as many years as you like. That's not covered at all in your authorisation. There's no limit at all. So how do we put goods in a customs warehouse? Goods are declared to customs at the border when the goods arrive with what we call a simplified declaration. So rather than complete a full declaration and pay duty when the goods arrive, a simple declaration is given to customs to say these goods are going through to an authorised customs warehouse. The goods then enter the warehouse they must enter the warehouse within 5 days. And the person receiving the goods must check that they are all as in agreement with that simplified declaration. So if the simplified declaration says we're importing 2,000 widgets, then you need to check that there are 2,000 widgets there and notify HMRC straight away if there's any difference between what's been declared in that simplified declaration and what's actually been imported. And then you enter the goods in your stock records as normal. Now, the thing with the stock record is that it needs to be enhanced to cover all the information that HMRC requires. Manon, if we could just move on to the next, and if you could just flick through those for me, because I'm conscious of time. So a stock record for a customer's warehouse will contain the same information as you would have in your normal stock record, but it does contain some extra information such as the tariff classification and the customs value of the goods. It would contain details of the import entry under which the goods came in. So there's quite a bit of additional information that you need to keep. You also need to note in your stock records the date and details of any handling of the goods, if they have been repacked or that roll of material has been cut into pieces. And you must make regular stock takes. Nothing too onerous, but there are these very specific requirements of a stock record. But the goods have come in, they're held in the stock record, and then once you are ready to take the goods out, you must make a declaration to HMRC before the goods can be removed from the warehouse. So customers must be notified that you're going to take the goods out and that they will accept your customs declaration before the goods are moved. So you would either declare the goods to a customs procedure code to defer the import duty, which means that the goods are coming into the UK, I'm going to take them out now, and I'll pay the duty on them by the 15th of the following month. So you must have a deferment account to have a customs warehouse. Or you declare them to the customs procedure code to show that the goods are going to be exported. And of course, if they're being exported from the customs warehouse, then no duty is payable. Once that declaration is made and been accepted by HMRC, you can update your stock record and the goods can move. One additional thing is that goods may also be destroyed if you have got goods in the customs warehouse which have been sitting there for a number of years, which often seems to happen. If the goods are not worth selling or you cannot re-export them, then they can be destroyed without incurring any customs debt. So that's a very quick run round of how a customs warehouse operates. As I say, the stock record is, the details on the stock record are fine if you are importing perhaps something like tractors, so you've only got a few in your customs warehouse and you can easily identify them and notify customs when they come in and out. But if you have something like boxes of screws or nuts and bolts, then it's much more difficult to identify in your stock records the goods that have come in and the goods that are going out, and tie the goods that are going out of the customs warehouse back to the original importation. So a lot of people who operate a customs warehouse, particularly for fast moving goods, will want what we call a duty management system. And that's a system that interfaces with your own records to produce the customs warehouse records. It enables fast release of the goods. So if you are, for example, if you're Amazon, you cannot actually make a declaration to customs before you want to remove goods from your customs warehouse. You would you want that fast moving of goods. You want to be able to take the goods out and not have to get prior approval from HMRC. So a duty management system enables this fast release of the goods, and it will enable the operator to use some acronyms here, sorry, CFSP, Customs Freight Simplified Procedures, and entry in declarants records to actually release those goods quickly and make the declaration to customs at a later date. It still requires the simplified frontier declaration at import, but the daily activity of what's happening, the goods going out, is just reported in your own system, and then at the end of the day, a report goes into HMRC. That's called the supplementary declaration. So that's made usually at the end of the day or within 24 hours of the goods leaving the customs warehouse. And then a monthly report is put in each month by the fourth working day of the following month to enable, to show customs all the activity that has happened during the month. It's, as I say, it's a much more complex system, but it does enable companies that have, you know, a lot of turnover of goods through their customs warehouse, and particularly is useful for companies who are operating customs warehouses for other parties to actually be able to offer them this service. So particularly, as I say, the logistic companies would use a duty management system to actually run the stock through the customs warehouse and do the reporting to customs. As I say, the fast release of the goods is using something called Customs Freight Simplified Procedures. Now, Customs Freight Simplified Procedures can be used without a customs warehouse. It is a simplified procedure, as I say, not to be confused with a special procedure. It's a simplified way of making a declaration to HMRC. And in fact, if we're looking at what is going to happen during the first 6 months of next year, where we have deferred declarations for EU imports for the first 6 months, the declaration must be made in that case using Customs Freight Simplified Procedures. The one thing about using Customs Freight Simplified Procedures is that the person operating them, often, as I say, the logistics company or the third party that is operating them, perhaps on your behalf, is that he would always be jointly and severally liable for that declaration. That requirement has been removed, and this enables more companies to offer Customs Freight Simplified Procedures from the 1st of January next year. And in fact, I believe that it's one of the offerings from the Chamber of Commerce that I'm sure Anne will tell us more about before we sign off today. So Customs Freight Simplified Procedures is a good, if you are using fast moving goods within a customs warehouse, CFSP is something that you should consider, but equally CFSP can be used, as I say, and will be used particularly by intermediaries to make declarations or deferred declarations for EU imports in the first 6 months of next year. Before I finish, I was going to mention return goods relief. I did mention it briefly, but it's really something that you should be considering if you are sending goods out to Europe. Well, not when you're sending goods out to Europe, because nothing needs to be claimed in advance. It's if you're returning goods from Europe. If goods are coming back, then return goods relief can be claimed on the goods that you re-import. And it doesn't have to be, there's no pre-authorization required from HMRC. So there's probably going to be a lot of goods that perhaps you've already exported to Europe this year that are going to be coming back for one reason or another next year. Return goods relief will be available on those goods. Generally, with return goods relief, you have to evidence the export by showing a copy of the export declaration that the goods went out on. But of course, there are no export declarations to Europe at the moment, and a system is going to be developed as to how we evidence that those goods were sent out to Europe before, during 2020, or even before, if they are being returned next year. So we are still waiting for that detail as well, which is why I haven't covered anything about return goods relief today. And I'm conscious of time. I'm sure, I know you've got a few things to say, but
yeah, but that's fine. But
some questions that
I've got a couple of questions, Barbara. Three, in fact, to close on for your presentation.
Okay.
The first one is: would you be able to repack and quality control in a customs warehouse?
Yes, you would. That's totally fine. That's what we call usual forms of handling.
Fantastic. Somebody's said, currently applying for OP, part of the application is to provide CFSP. So now applying for that first. Is it worth doing all this, or just wait until someone decides what is actually needed?
Well, I think that my personal opinion now is that you need to apply for these reliefs because if there is no trade deal, or even if there's just a bit of a trade deal, we don't know what that trade deal is going to look like. It might not cover your goods and what you want to do. If you make an application and it sits on the shelf and it's never used, well, there's no harm has been done. But it does mean that you are ready to, if you have that authorization, then it's ready to go from day one if it's needed.
Thank you. And the last question.
People do ask me that there is no cost for making an application apart from your time, yes.
And the last question is, any organisations that already have IPR or OPR registrations, will they be being asked to reapply? Because we know some things that they do have to reapply. So after we leave the EU, will there be a period of time, or will they, where those applications, or are they just continuous?
Yes, the applications that have been, that the authorisations that you currently have will have been authorised under EU legislation. The HMRC is just going to let those flow. There is legislation in place to say that they will automatically switch to the UK legislation and will see out their normal time period. As I say, an IPR authorisation is generally for 3 years. So if you have one, whatever date, renewal date is on it, will still apply. Thank you, Barbara.
And thank you for another comprehensive whistle-stop tour of the updates on some of the things that are going on. We know it's a huge, customs procedures and everything's huge and everything's changing so rapidly. So that you're always on top of all the latest developments. So we appreciate that. And thank you again for your presentation today. As useful as ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. So I'm going to just mention a few things to keep you up to speed of some of the chambers. And we have had some questions about some of the export documentation. So I just wanted to mention a few things. We have on our website a transition hub, and it's where you can access a lot of information about what's happening, latest updates from government, copies of all the webinars we've already had, etc., etc. Please do pop on there, and if you have any inquiries, just fill out the inquiry form that's on there, send it through, and we will endeavour to get back to you with the answers. And if we don't know the answers, we know someone that does, so we will point you in the right direction if we don't have the answers. I would also urge you, if you don't already subscribe to our International Trade Bulletin, electronic bulletin, please to do so. You can just do that by emailing export@tvchamber.co.uk. So we've also got a few webinars coming up in the very near future. I just wanted to mention, you see the first three ones about international marketing essentials, as we are in this current climate, plus with Brexit, mitigating currency risk, doing business Egypt, but one which may appeal to a lot of you is in relation to the changes to the export documentation. So my colleague, myself and my colleague Malin, who actually is doing the technical things today, we are going to be making ourselves available to you on the 1st of December to give you a brief on how things are going to change, whether that be certificates of origin, preference documents, carnets, ATA carnets, etc. So please, if you need to know that, book on. We will be sending out information on our bulletins, but please book on. It also gives a great opportunity for questions and answer sessions on that. Just do so via our website. And then our next offering, and thank you, Barbara, she mentioned that we are authorised to do customs declarations, so under our Chamber Customs banner. So please, 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 if you already, whether you use a freight forwarder, and you know most people do use a freight forwarder or an agent, please remember there's demand will probably outstrip supply as we move forward. So if you want to use us as a backup, we're there to help if needs be. We can talk to you about that. The information's all there available. And my final piece to say today is to remind you that we do offer a very comprehensive set of training courses on all topics in relation to trade facilitation. And at the moment, some of those are actually, HMRC are grant funding some of the courses, which will give you more information on how to do customs declarations, to upskill your staff on customs declarations. You can receive up to, I think, depending on the size of your organisation, up to 70% of the funding for that course from HMRC. It's a very simple way to apply for funding. They're very quick at returning to say yay, nay, or maybe. So please have a look at our training course programme, and if you're interested, contact us and we can give you a quote in order to apply for your grant. So thank you. Last slide, please, Malin. I just wanted to say thank you all for joining us today. The webinar will be made available on a recorded session on our website, but I will email you the presentation, a copy of the previous webinar, which covers the general procedures that are going to change, customs procedures that are going to change from the beginning of the year. And I would say to you, please contact us if you need any help. You're not sure, as I said, if we don't know, then we know the people that do. So my contact details are there. I have a team of 18 people willing there and to help you with anything you need. So please do give us a call. I would also ask you to supply any feedback or anything, any topics that you may be interested in hearing about. Please let us know, and we can look to put maybe webinars on those. But I will also say to you, thank you for joining us again, and stay safe. Thank you very much.